My guest this week is Jay Gonzalez. Perhaps best known for his role as the guitarist and keyboard player for the mighty Drive-By Truckers, Jay has increasingly grown his invigorating and inventive body of work, reimagining the sound of classic AM radio through his own kaleidoscopic approach. From his acclaimed solo albums, most recently 2021's Back to the Hive, through collaborations with such like-minded musical adventurers as Chris Stamey, Scott McCaughey, REM's Bill Berry, and others, the multi-talented Athens, Georgia native remains on a steadfast quest to push his beloved pop music into remarkable new shapes, imbuing his style-blurring songcraft with adventurous arrangements, timeless songwriting, and a lifetime of passion. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Jay Gonzalez. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me, man.
I love all the different parts of your musical life and past. It's like you work with people who write comedy and stories for Adult Swim, and then you have like a past in power pop, and then you're like this Neil Young stomp monster with the Drive-By Truckers, and then you go over to the piano and play The Most Beautiful Thing. I don't know how you do it. You are such a mystery to me still, and I know you.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, it's very much a, jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation. I've learned to like just to sort of keep up with friends and stuff is to just do a little bit of everything and try to, trick everyone. And it's worked so far.
It's a good trick. I think we're all faking it in a certain way.
The self-delusion is a big part of, and part of it, and sometimes it's easier than other times.
Well, the film you picked to talk about today is a TV documentary about the band Rockpile called Born Fighters from 1979. And I had this in the video store and I was pretty mesmerized by it. But this is an interesting film because I know more about Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe as individuals than I do the music of Rockpile. It's kind of a blind spot for me, so I'm kind of excited to talk to you about it. Was Rockpile the first Nick Lowe stuff you ever heard, or
no? And I don't hope this isn't bad, but I actually know the Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds stuff better than Rockpile too. And I think generally, most people do. I think because they only really put that one album out. You know, I think and it's a great album, but I don't know if it's as great as it seems. As you would think when they finally got to all use the same name. Basically it's all the same members. Billy Bremner and is Terry Williams. Is that the drummer's name, right?
Yeah, Terry Williams.
Yeah, and they're all playing together on Dave's albums and Nick's albums, and then because of legal stuff, right? They couldn't use the name Rockpile, but then when they finally did, there's some great songs on there, and of course the playing is unreal. But I don't know if it's up there with with Labor of Lust, to me, which is like it's the ultimate Rockpile album, So, but I'll tell you what I know.
Well, they both had such interesting careers and how they crossed paths. I mean, Dave Edmunds, had the names of his bands before. He was into Human Beings in the 60s. He was called Feathers originally. That was his nickname. The other people he played with were like Tennessee Tony, Hank Two Sticks, Brian Rockhouse Davies, and Bob Congo Jones. All legends.
Absolutely.
But they would do covers of things like Morning Dew, and then they started a new band called Love Sculpture.
Right.
And then they kind of had a novelty hit with Sabra Dance.
Got the Turians.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of a classical piece and just ripping.
Real Looney Tunes vibe, like isn't it? They
Totally.
use that in all kinds of cartoons, right? I feel like that's mainly where I learned that one.
It's very hyper and very fun. Like it's something you would put on a mixtape for someone in the 80s,
Totally. And I mean, I think that was a thing in that era was like, because didn't like the Who would do like Hall of the Mountain King, and then like it was like of course like Classical Gas and stuff like that. But I think there was a thing in that late 60s where the rock guys would every once in a while, and because instrumentals were bigger too then, and but I feel like in England and Great Britain in particular, it's like they really love doing like these like rocked out versions of, classical pieces and stuff. But yeah, that one, his is,
Yeah.
I mean, the playing is unreal, but it's not, you don't listen to it and think that's Dave,
No,
Dave.
not at all. It's not who you think of. And also, I feel like at that time, you either did what you're talking about, like reinterpreting a classical piece through rock,
Right.
or else you had to do some sort of tribute to your parents' 40s radio music. It was like everyone, it's so amazing. Every album I have, like every band had their like, little showtimey
Oh yeah.
ragtime thing with the megaphone. It was
The
like
music hall too. Yeah.
everybody did it. It was so funny.
It's funny, but now if you think about it, it's like someone now doing, a 60s pastiche or something like that.
Well, even less though, like it'd be 20 years. So it'd be somebody like going back and doing Mudhoney or Nirvana or something,
You're right. Wow.
Yeah, or the Spice Girls or something like that. Like go back 20 years and be like, it's either pop bands or it's grunge.
Yeah, right. I mean, McCartney, of course, really dug into that with the honey pie and all that stuff.
Totally.
And the Kinks as well, but it was so close. But yeah, it was it makes sense. But man, putting it in a context with the 90s thing it makes me really feel both old and just like wow, but also putting it more in perspective, because to me it was like listening to that was just like ancient, even back in the 80s or whatever. But,
I agree, but it's so funny to think about rock in the 60s. Even like when the Nuggets compilation came out in 72, they're like, hey, remember these songs from 6 years ago, 7 years ago? Remember that genre, these great radio garage hits? Wow, what a flashback, what a time. And you're like, 6 years ago? Wow. I mean, I guess bands were not built to last back then. So it was like, all right, this is kind of disposable. And there was not a legacy yet built in rock and roll.
And they were putting, 2 albums out a year or 3 albums out a year too. It was moving so fast, that 6 years was ancient. Whereas now it's like 6 years between an album.
Yeah.
It's common. So
well, when this album came out, when Rockpile's album came out in 1980, it was kind of interesting for me because they were totally lumped in with the new wave movement, and their album you could find everywhere, and it kind of had like new wave colors on their cover, and like kind of splashy.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing them on Fridays. They played Teacher Teacher and some other songs. I think Dave did a song and Nick did a song. But I also remember being like, wow, these guys are old. And they were not old. They were like 29 and I think
35,
34,
right?
35. Yeah. And you're like, wow. And it was also so rock and very baked in a tradition. 1980 being like the year of Gary Newman and Devo breaking through with Whip It and B-52s and Talking Heads, to have this kind of be like, hey, this is part of the same thing, even though I think they'd be the first to be like, we're not part of it. Right. But I do feel like their relationship with Stiff Records and Nick's past with Elvis Costello and producing those records and Elvis Costello covering, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to trust it, but there was something, I was 12. So there was a part of me that was like, no, they're not squiggly enough. And they're what are they wearing? They're just wearing clothes.
Hey, where are the synths? I mean, there's no angular guitar or synth or, or any, it was very throwback,
It was.
And I guess, coming out of the pub rock thing, which makes sense especially when you kind of watch the scene in the movie where they're all kind of in the control room, which I'm sure we'll get to, which is insane. It's like a who's who in that era of music.
Gosh.
But like,
yeah,
it's like you realize like, oh, it's how quickly the pub rock thing kind of was repackaged into new wave or whatever, just to kind of sell the records.
Well, and some people came out of that, Joe Strummer and the Stranglers and all these, a lot of bands that got the punk, post-punk, or new wave pass. Right. Were part of that. But, Nick Lowe was part of, is it Brinsley Schwartz? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know much about them?
I only in recent times have I really, I'd always, when I read about them, would go back and check them out. And then I recently bought like a two LP compilation of their first two records, and or not compilation, but their first two records in one package. And it's amazing. It's definitely more of them trying to be the band, a British version of the band.
Okay.
And so it's sort of weird America kind of vibes, but then you can hear, I believe they did a version of Cruel to Be Kind. Uh, and then you can hear the sort of him leaning into the pop and sort of, more sort of, not punk, but more, pub rock kind of vibes, and stripping it down for sure. He even in that thing where they're sort of that Hammond organ and maybe extended arrangements and these sort of 3-part harmonies and stuff. It's every once in a while it'll be a song where it would be sort of like this just pop nugget. Like I feel like Nick couldn't get away from that. Not that he was necessarily trying to, but even in that era, he was always gonna kind of be, looking for the hits, kind of, so yeah, it is great to go back and listen to, though, because there is some really cool like borderline psychedelic shit that they did, and it's pretty awesome.
That's intense. I didn't know that about them. I did hear kind of an amazing story about the band, though, that they had a management company called Fame Pushers Limited, which is like so perfect, right?
Yeah.
Fame Pushers Limited might be the greatest like rock and roll juggernaut thing to throw around.
Right.
But they basically got them like appearance at New York's Fillmore East, and they flew a plane load of British journalists over to witness this event, and it totally backfired. And I guess the band were kind of a joke, and it hurt their credibility in the London pub rock scene.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to think about, 72, 73, those kind of moves were being made because music was getting so big and money was getting so big behind it. And also, yeah, you're right. A lot of the songs he was working on, like what's so funny about Peace, Love, and Understanding and Cruel to Be Kind,
right?
The nuggets are there. And is the album Jesus So Cool the same as it had an alternate title?
Yeah, Pure Pop for Now People was the American.
Right.
I think Jesus is Cool a little too much for the American market. Yeah. So
those early Nick Lowe records are hit after hit on a record, and also kind of switching genre from genre, track to track. It's really ambitious, and you can definitely see, obviously Elvis Costello was a massive fan, and taking a lot of that inspiration from him of just being like, we have 14 songs on this record, and in 6 months we're going to make another one with 15 songs, and we're going to do 13, and it just feels like it was a race to just get all this pop goodness out of their head and onto records as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and no song over, 2 minutes, 50 seconds, kind of, very. I mean, I believe I read somewhere that Nick was, that was his goal with that, was to make it sound like an album of singles, like a compilation of singles, and it really does. I mean, because it jumps genres and they're all catchy, and it's not necessarily like a story from beginning to end kind of thing. It's just like boom boom boom, just hook after, and it's just so good and so raw, his production, which I don't know if he just started producing, so I don't know if it's down to that, but from sort of those mid 70s Mary Provost and songs like that to getting up to like 78 79 is, not that the stuff on Labor of Love sounds lush or anything, but it's definitely like really, well recorded and sounds really good. It's like it's almost like he thought 5 years, he kind of like really ramped up his like production, quality and everything, and it's while maintaining the rocking thing and not, overdoing it, which he definitely talks about in this, in the movie, which is really like a primer for rock production if you really like think about it.
Yeah, they go beat by beat in the recording process, and it's funny. It feels all of a sudden like it's something you'd see in school, maybe about like, this is how recording production works. It's incredible. Before I know we're going to get to the film, we are, but I want to give a little bit more context where Dave and Nick were right before this recording of this movie happens. It's really time specific, but I wanted to ask you. I know that you've covered Nick Lowe's songs. like learning those songs, does he have a certain thing he relies on? Is it what's his key to creating these amazing songs?
I guess a lot of it is the sort of tension and release between the verses and the choruses, and always having sort of uh, a super catchy sing along chorus, but then knowing how to really uh, get to it and get to it quickly. Cruel to Be Kind, he gets there right away, and really, I think it's like succinctness and just not overdoing stuff, and just really it's interesting chord progressions, but never anything that makes you kind of tilt your head. It's accessibility while also, like the whole thing about sort of pop songwriting. I don't even know where I read it, but it's like familiarity, but with surprise, a little bit of surprise. Like
Right.
if you want people to feel like they've heard it, but also be surprised by it, and taking something. And I feel like he was definitely, you know, it was a throwback thing, certainly, because there's 50s music, Everly Brothers and stuff like that going on is definitely the basis of it, but not being afraid of adding some modern for the time production, things, and strange little bells and whistles, and a bit of like novelty, like what's the Bay City Rollers like song, it's like he
That's
kind of,
such a cool song.
it's so, and it's like funny because it's like it was kind of just sort of a joke, I think, or if it was like might have been him trying to cash in on their whole thing, but it's like he wrote a better Bay City Rollers song than they did, and
Yeah,
like but he, and it's almost like thrown off, and that's where I feel like, yeah, some of his best stuff sounds like it's thrown off, and you could tell it, and again, and he takes himself very seriously in a sense, but then he also, I think, as a mechanism for not overdoing stuff, sort of, convinces himself that, oh, the lyrics don't matter, blah, blah, blah. And while he's saying this while he's a great lyricist, but he also is not a heady lyricist. It's not like Procol Harum, like poetry kind of shit, even though Endless Gray Ribbon really is super poetic. He knows, I think he looks at himself as just a, kind of a hack songwriter, it's just, and I've heard interviews where he says, oh, it's nothing personal. I don't write about my personal life. It's all just made up, which I feel like, is probably a little bit of a, smoke and mirror,
sure.
a little blocking people out, and, keeping a little distance there, but super heavy songs,
Totally.
but manages to fit them in, so.
Have you seen him live many times?
One time I saw him open for Wilco in outside of Atlanta, and it was just him and acoustic guitar, and I think it was amazing. I wish it was longer. I wish it was just him, and I wish I saw him. I know he's just been out with the Low Straight Jackets, and but it was phenomenal. I mean, especially you really see when he plays Stripped Down how solid the songs are, and it's just like it's him casually strumming with his thumb, and no bells and whistles, and just, singing, probably a lower key than the original and very casual. And, he's aged so well musically, and just the way he looks, it's like he's just so
Yeah,
cool, and like
he is
it's
so
like,
cool.
it's just like beyond, you can't even handle how cool this guy is. It's like he figured out at a certain point, I think, like around the convincer, it's like, I'm gonna slow it down, I'm gonna, it's gonna be mellow, these gonna be these heartbreaking songs, um and then I'm just gonna look as dapper as you could possibly look as a person, and
Yeah.
then and just, I think that's just I mean, Jesus is cool. It's, he'd probably just, that was tongue in cheek for him, but it's like he really is like kind of, at least for me, the goal, but
Oh yeah.
which unattainable, but it's.
No, it's frustrating sometimes. I went and saw John Doe
Mhm.
play with an acoustic trio recently, and it's just infuriating because you're like, you're beautiful. You've got this amazing voice that just
Yeah,
soars,
yeah,
and you're also this incredible multi instrumentalist,
right,
credible
right.
lyricist, credible songwriter, and you're just, it just makes you go like, ah. okay, I like, what am I doing as a musician like this? But you
Right.
realize rare air and, just
Well,
one of a kind.
rare air, but also, it's kind of the way it should be. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like, artists in general or anybody should, as you get older, you should get better. And it should be like the wisdom should be there and you should be stripping away all the excess stuff of youth. And he kind of does that, and I think the greatest folks do when you see them,
Well, when I saw
um,
Loverboy recently at the county fair, they did
yeah,
not run towards that light, but that's a different
no,
conversation.
yeah, they've got an audience and they've got to kind of I think it's also depending on the
Of
situation
course,
and
of course.
your platform. Like Nick at a county fair would be an interesting thing to see. I mean,
Yes.
I wonder if he would be sort of pulling out some of the a little more rockers and trying to, but he probably wouldn't. He would just embrace it and love the playing while watching the Ferris wheel and people eating
Yeah,
elephant
totally.
ears.
I think you'd probably love it, actually. With little
Absolutely.
straight jackets behind him, he'd just be like, all right, this is,
Oh man.
you know,
And people would lose their minds seeing these guys with masks playing, it's like
absolutely.
it's to me that's another genius move. I'm sure it just
Yeah,
happened very naturally, but it's like who else would do that, and it
agreed.
comes off so cool, so cool, but not weird at all, not strange and I mean, you
It's
know,
easy to forget what a big part Nick Lowe was in Stiff Records creation and
mm,
picking the bands and the Damned and kind of helping pull Elvis Costello out of obscurity. And, he was in the meeting when they're like, where are the glasses? Like, you know what I mean?
sure.
And so it's really interesting that Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe combined creative forces. It makes sense musically, but they also seem so different. And so, you did mention earlier they did record 4 albums with this 4-piece lineup, but only one of them got released under the Rockpile name, and that was Seconds of Pleasure. But they did 2 with Dave, and then they did Labor Lust for Nick.
Mhm.
And a lot of that was due to contractual stuff. Dave Edmunds was, I keep forgetting this, but he was on Swan Song. He was on Led
Yeah,
Zeppelin's label, along with Bad Company. It just kind of shows he was such a well-respected musician and guitar player, and
absolutely.
had been recording records in Wales at,
Rockfield, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
recording at
Rockfield, yeah.
Rockfield,
Yeah.
where Queen, did Bohemian Rhapsody, and
Yeah.
everyone recorded there. And actually recorded an album. I produced an album in Rockfield,
Right.
and I remember the engineer saying, "Hey, I bet if you go down to the pub, you'll just run into Dave." And I was like, I can't do that. I was too
Yeah.
terrified. Like, what was I going to do? 'Cause like,
Yeah.
hey, I know who you are, but I just want to say
Yeah.
I'm here making a record up in the place that you helped create.
You never know how it's gonna go. It could be amazing. He could be like come up, but he also is what did Nick say in the movie? And it's like he's not the friendliest, guy in the world. And
No, they there's some
I
great
can't remember.
quotes in it. Let's get into the movie. It's
Yeah,
so
sure.
strange
Yeah,
because I don't think the documentary filmmakers knew what they were going to get by doing this. And I also feel like they didn't know what to do with it, like storytelling wise. It's really odd. I mean, it even begins with like a really weird dissonant, like
yeah,
note at the beginning when it says, Rockpile. And you're just
yeah,
like, is this like supposed to be a horror movie? Like, what
yeah.
am I getting into? And the narrator starts, he goes, record company problems have forced Edmunds and Lowe to release their records separately. They do apparently record together. December 1978, and in 2 days they will record Edmunds' 5th solo album and Lowe's 2nd. And that's like basically it for
Yeah.
any type of like context.
Yeah. No flashbacks, no setup at all. It's
We don't know who these people are. And then, and so it starts with Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe playing acoustic guitar across from each other, kind of teaching songs.
mm,
And the first song out of the gate, you're just like, so beautiful.
yeah, it's the acoustic. It sounds like the Everly Brothers. Now I'm
Yes.
blanking on the name of it, but it's they're singing. Nick singing this beautiful song, and then he ends it with this like silly sort of Elvis-y kind of ending.
Yeah, self-conscious, self-deprecating
Yeah,
thing. But for a couple of minutes, you're just the voices are incredible together, and
Yeah.
the sense of them just being relaxed and enjoying each other's talents. They're sitting across from somebody that they're in love with, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, they're so, they it's interesting when they're by themselves, like the contrast between when they're the two of them are by themselves, talking, and then when it's with the band and other people around, it's like that's where you see sort of, Nick being sort of, honest and almost real down when it's with just the two of them, and then he becomes like the vibe guy when everyone's in the room,
Yes.
and it's like, oh my God, this is the guy, like the life of the party. But when you get him aside, and that's the thing, they start off with this beautiful thing, and I think one of the things he says is we're in a horrible state. It's like it's almost this dread
Yeah.
of like, what is this gonna work out, and
Yeah,
talking
he
about,
says it's my career
yeah,
here, but it's not looking very promising.
in a horrible state, which I know is in one of his songs, "Tried to Mate in a Horrible State." It's just he, it's yeah, he's almost dreading it, which is, going into the studios. It's always fun, but it is a daunting thing, especially if you're kind of, in control, So, and the songwriter too, you could tell it's like the material, he's down on his material, he's down,
Yes.
but then Edmunds is just like impatient and like, come on, snap out of it sort of vibe.
Well, it doesn't help, I think matters that they are pouring the biggest whiskey pours I've ever seen in my life in
Yes.
that isn't in like a fiction movie, like
Well,
about alcoholism. I mean, basically giant jam jars, and they're just like to the
yeah.
top, put the bottle down, bottle's half gone, it's in this glass.
Well, the other thing I noticed is, because I got real curious about what they were drinking. This is how ridiculous I get with them. Like, the
Love it. I love it.
secret to the album's like, what is the secret? What is he drinking? It's like, it's one thing like being a gear nerd and being like, what pedal did they used to get that sound? And it's like, what were they drinking to do that? And I looked it up, and it turned out, I think it was also in his Nick's the biography on Nick. But I think Will Birch from the Records did it a few years back, and it's great. But it's like I think he just drinking Blue Nun Wine, is those big bottles. So
Oh,
I think
okay.
they're drinking beer and they're drinking whiskey and stuff. But I think Nick, when you see him with the like kind of chalice looking shit, it's like he's
Blue.
it's Blue Nun, which is like shitty German wine. And
Right.
I feel like it's okay to say that. I feel like that was is very understood. I'm not ever having it, but like, but then there's a scene when I rewatched it before this where I think it's 5 bottles of it next to him, empty open bottles, and
Yes.
it's like he was just they were, and you end up. It's funny you're saying how the first sound is just this dissonant sound, but also one of the first things before they even start playing is Nick coughing, and it sounds like the most like tuberculosis,
Yes.
just
I know.
phlegmy sound, and they're so not afraid to do that. There's like another scene where Dave's singing and he's just like he like irps, and it's like close up, and it's just like you could tell they're almost like annoyed that they're there, and they leave it in there. It's like very awesome.
Usually in a film like this,
Hmm.
a documentary filmmaker knows how to eventually disappear so that the
Yeah,
people feel comfortable in this
yeah,
film, in their
right.
film. I get the feeling in this film that they were so self-aware of themselves, so self-conscious and so aware of the equipment. There's a layer there of embarrassment and kind of like,
Hmm.
I'm uncomfortable, and then they kind of overcompensate by being cocky. It's a really strange vibe that I feel like is heightened because it's
Hmm.
being filmed, that I'm sure was
Absolutely.
there, but
Yeah.
it definitely feels like they're playing it up and probably saying things that maybe didn't need to be said if no one was documenting it.
In particular, Nick, I feel like he kind of he kind of messes with Dave a lot, and says stuff like, about him not being able, it doesn't not knowing the song, and a little later in the movie, and Dave, you can tell getting mad because he's a little more hyper aware. Even Nick sort of I think Nick's more of a showman, and he kind of plays up for the for the camera, whereas you could just tell Dave's just like, barely able to tolerate it, and just so, focused and everything. But we've both been in the studio, you know what it's like. It's like you're this like womb kind of thing, and you're
Yeah.
extra, everything is like extra heightened, and you're, it's nerve-wracking, money's being paid and everything. And then when someone's filming it, it's just like this other layer of like self-awareness when you're
Yes.
already like, I'm saying this out of tune. But in a way, with this one, I feel like it really brings out the process and like all those sort of, if you haven't done it, you get to see how, overdubbing and how nerve-wracking that is, and
Right.
and they certainly mess with each other, and also show how how it can be not pleasant.
Yeah, no, and they're recording in a really kind of famous studio, Eden Studios in
Yeah.
London, and ironically, Bay City Rollers recorded there, and John Cale and Elvis Costello and
Wow.
Sex Pistols, and later on Happy Mondays and the Smiths. It was really well respected. But
Wow.
for a band that's so, wanting to do something like more traditional, they're
Hmm.
they're really relying on it's like a 24 track studio, and they're
Hmm.
really longing for like a 4-track sound.
Well, they talk about that. It's pretty funny. That was another thing at the beginning, or where they're, talking about how do you make a good rock and roll record in this modern age? It's 1978, and
Yeah.
deal with all the all this the then crazy technology, which now is like quadrupled, but and make a real heartfelt rock and roll record. And I one of my favorite things is how Nick talks about, Phil Spector, which is only like 10 years before,
I know.
but he's talking about them making that record, and he's like, he was talking about like they had an 8-track and they would over, and then immediately like Big Brother Dave Edmunds is like, no, no, that's not it. And then he like,
Yeah, it
you know,
corrects them.
he corrects him and he calls him out, and he's just like, 3-track recorder. They all did it live. And you could tell Nick kind of pulls back. He's like, oh, I thought that was just publicity. Like, it's like that their dynamic is so older brother, younger
Oh,
brother.
it's almost a little Spinal Tap there, in a
Well,
funny
that's
way. Like the kind of like David St. Hubbins, Nigel Tufnell thing where they're like, no, that's not how it went,
and I've heard that they have actually uh that they watched that like before Spinal. I could be wrong about that, but
Oh,
I
I love
remember
it.
talking about it years ago, and like and just it's like it makes sense. I mean, it's so Spinal Tap. I mean, aside from the sort of heavy metal aspect, but there is that they must have seen that. Well, I guess that none of the Spinal Tap guys are really British, so maybe they didn't come across that. But they were hip guys. I'm sure they came across it somehow, and and researching, and they were making a big, yeah, yeah.
Does have a vibe here of that kind of like they finish each other's thoughts. They lovingly get on each other's nerves. It's a strange dynamic. But I wanted to ask you, you've recorded so many different ways. Do you think there's a truth in like doing something on a 4-track versus a larger studio? What do you prefer when you're making your music?
Well, I mean, my initial reaction is sort of being a little bit of a control freak, and but not a guy who feels comfortable telling people what to do. Like I do enjoy recording, and sort of what Dave Edmunds was doing earlier, like recording by myself or with one other person and layering stuff, But definitely since the pandemic happened, I've realized since then I've gone in and done some so I have one project I do with writing songs with someone in town, and he writes the lyrics, and I write the music, and then we have friends come in and we've cut these just completely live. And this is a guy who never he's got Grady Thrasher, he's in town, and he never did any music stuff, but he hired me to write some Christmas songs with him, and then we ended up going to the studio and doing it. And every time we would do it, it started off with just me cutting it live. And there would be no overdubs, mainly because he never was in a studio and he had no concept of overdubbing. And which we kind of all went with. And I could tell the engineer at the studio loved it because there was, all the time is spent sort of setting up and overdubbing. But we would do these songs and keep them completely live. And then it ended up being like a 6-piece band. And we would just do takes until we got it completely done live. And, and that's something my recording partner Chris Grant has always loved to do as much live as possible, and I always know it's better. And now it's like I'm dying to go back and do that because it is they do that in this in the documentary. Granted, they're in the control room, but they're really cutting the basics as live as possible.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. There's a magic that you get where you're just physically playing off each other, and it's not like trying to match a pre-recorded thing that nowadays is it's so much of it is done. The whole sort of bedroom recording or like computer recording, even in huge studios, I think is generally building up from a basis, of a beat or something. And I love doing that, but I really do think it's way scarier to go in and do something with a full band as live as possible. There's so much more that can go wrong. There's so much more communication that has to happen, and all of that, if it works out, is the magic that makes it sound like a real, a live recording, which is, again, it's like what we're all kind of, that's the illusion we're trying to make. And of course, like in movies and stuff, you have to clean it up and do overdubs and little things, but you want the basis of it. So long ass answer to a short question is like, at the very least, have the basics recorded together, and then sprinkle the fairy dust and
Right.
put the chroma after.
It's so funny. It comes up. It says studio day one. All of a sudden, you're like, oh shit, we're not. They aren't even counting this other thing they've been talking and practicing on acoustic guitars and harmonizing. It's like, oh, okay, I guess this is really where it starts. It really is kind of an amazing slow down and patient explanation on how studios work and how tracks are built. Nick's talking about, you make the record sound louder than everyone else. We try to make that, like just kind of come through the radio. And, we got to get the drums right and as loud as the vocals. They kind of explain it in real time. But they're working on a Nick song, and it's really fun to see them frustrated in learning some of these parts because it is under rehearsed. They're basically learning this stuff kind of in the studio.
Yeah, absolutely.
And building it in the studio. I thought it was really interesting that Dave Edmunds is in the control room playing all his leads, right? And Nick Lowe's sitting there looking hammered and tired.
Yeah.
And he just keeps pushing Dave Edmunds. He's like, I want it to sound like a wasp in a jam jar trying to get out.
I know. I love that. I always wanted to name like an album "Wasp in a Jam Jar." Like that stood out because it does that. He's got that B bender thing on the telly. And it's just like honking and everything, and it is like it's he's like more frenzied, and and is that when he says something about like we need to set, you can't make this kind of music without being on drugs, and that's where and Nick says that, and then Dave says, easy champ. We got to go we got to go the whole round. He was like, he's like, pulls it back. Like, like he's a little older. He's like, this is being filmed, whereas like, I think Nick is still, barely in his 20s, but like,
Nick's being a punk.
He is.
I mean, that's what it is. Like Nick's like,
totally.
I'm hanging out with like these, London weirdos, and I'm part of this scene. And
Dave thinks that's bullshit. He's like a little older.
Yes.
He's like, he sees all this sort of like, they're as pure as the punk stuff could be musically. There was obviously a lot of bravado and like anything, any sort of rock and roll. There's the visual element stuff, but it is funny like how that he's trying, and he is trying to piss off Dave, and he does a really good job of doing that, there and in one other scene too. Yeah,
he says, our relationship is very distant, even though we are close friends. Which I'm like, that's a lyric. That's not something you say out loud to people.
No, there's a lot of lyric worthy things that they just sort of toss off,
it's
too.
Amazing.
And like it's even like Billy Bremner just little things like where he's just like, we'll try it, and then if you don't like it, elbow it, and just these little turns of phrase are very like Scottish, Scotch, Irish, British, just like something the Beatles would say. Like there's all these offhand remarks are just like, I'm like writing them down, and I have
hit me with them. I want to hear some of them. Let's talk about them.
Well, when they walk in and Dave says, asks the engineer, is it Roger? I can't remember, Bakarian, I think is his name. He asks him, instead of saying like, play us the track, he says, give us a burst then. It's like who says that, and it's just like, are they planning this? But they're not, and it's just and then when Dave goes in to sing, I think it's Endless Gray Ribbon, and he just like Nick talking to the camera, explaining how, he doesn't know the song well enough yet, and it's hard to sing it. It's out of his range. And the whole time Dave's standing there, right? And he's just like looking at him and he's just like, oh, I was just telling them how bad a singer you are. And then you can see that like he knows he's fucking with him, but he's also like really upset. He's like, oh, I'll just go sit in the chair and meditate in there. Like he could tell it's like really getting his goat. And I do think that's a producer technique that it took me a long time because I've been on the wrong end of that producer technique before, where they kind of like, let you have it to kind of get you in a space where, you're actually gonna,
Right.
do a thing. They're not, it's not a kid glove situation. It's like, fuck you. And then you kind of go in there and play this thing. And then it's just like, oh, I was just joking,
Yeah. But it seems like if you're going to sing someone else's song, which is a real
Yeah.
gift to have,
Yeah.
like, to be able to write a song to have someone sing, which we've both done.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to write with someone else in mind. And
Sure.
Nick Lowe's not being very helpful in him finding the key. At one point he's like, well, you don't go to a shop and buy a voice. I'm trying,
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought one of the coolest things in it was their decision to drop the voice down. Like he sings it in a different.
Oh yeah, they speed up the tape.
They speed up the tape. Okay.
Right, so he can sing it because it's at the bottom of his register.
That's right. Right.
Caught this the last time I was watching it because I wasn't sure before. So yeah, so this way he can belt it a little more, because it is, you think most of the time you think the trouble is when stuff is in too high and you're trying to sing too high, which is generally, it can be an issue, but like in this case, I think because it was a country ballad and it was, Nick has a lower range,
Right.
he was trying to do this low sort of Johnny Cash kind of thing. And so when they got it and they're like, see how much better it is. And that's one of those technical things that, I really do wish I saw this, when I was like 17 or something, I'm glad I saw it when I did, but it was like all these years of doing it. And a lot of it, you're like, oh, I know that you learned it over time, but it is, again, yeah. And then Nick, in that same sort of subject, he talks about the voice, talks about as well as like trying to make the record as loud as possible, how having a high voice on radio is an important thing. And that's where they bring in the heart and soul of Rockpile, the genius that is Billy Bremner, is like, who's barely utters a word, but you can tell he is he's someone that's a guy that like it took, getting to Nick Lowe, and then like, and Dave Edmunds and all this stuff and reading up on him to realize, and then hearing the Billy Bremner solo album that is still like, you can't get it anywhere, but there's a song, Losing My Touch, that I got into, that I still can't really find. I think it was illegal downloading days, and it was like popped up somewhere, and it was just like, this guy is, he played that lead part on, what is that, Back on the Chain Gang with the Pretenders, like, like he's just this amazing guitar player. And also, but the thing, the secret weapon is that high voice, that high, what it shows that like how important singing in the right registers, which is, rock and rollers that generally, I think they a lot of times just write it in the key, wherever they write it, and you sing it. But I think with these guys, they're still in that school of like old school, almost country thing, where you would, change the key for a female singer and back around, and it was like more moved around, and that's one of the genius things they do is sort of awareness of that, and how quickly they jump on the fact that like, oh, we need to speed it up so Dave can sing the right key. And as much as he gets like picked on and he gets kind of, his feelings hurt, he knows, there's never like, fuck you, I'm not doing this. It's like, I love that they goad each other, but there's a common goal, and they're both really good enough at that thing they do that they can kind of, find it,
Yeah, and it sounds so much better when he does go up high. And then they're like, absolutely. We're going to bring Billy in, and he's just like so emotionless standing there. He's just like, all right, just like roll it. And then he does it like in a couple takes, and he's like, all right, now I'm going to go sit back on the couch and not say a word.
There's a few minutes Yeah, when they zoom in his face, and you could tell he's a real quiet guy, and you can see like all this stuff going on, and he doesn't say anything. And then he'll just, there's a few takes where they leave the room and it's just the camera's on him, and it's very mockumentary. Like it's like,
Yeah.
and he just kind of looks over, and then they cut real fast. But it's not just Spinal Tap, but every sort of fake documentary you've seen, it's like that thing. And he's just that he's it's like a character. He's like a background character who's really an important part. But like he also, that's where he said like something like, well, let me try it on the course, and then if you don't like it, you could just elbow it. He's the easygoing kind of the
Right.
lubrication in the machine. And then as is Terry Williams, like you see the balance of these two like very driven guys, and then the two sort of like the rhythm section, which that's we've all seen that.
It's a real thing.
I mean,
yes, definitely.
It's a real thing.
Yes.
And the balance, and I mean, I can't even like specifically say bands, because most of the bands I've ever been in, that's the case. It's just like it's a lovely thing. But yeah, goddamn. And then the other scene I think from earlier that I think you had referenced, but is where they were figuring out the song, where Billy Byrne was playing the lick on Born Fighter, and they're all singing it and correcting them, and bong bong bang, ba-da-da-da, and I think you think like, oh, I wonder if people like who aren't into music think like, oh, there's written out notes and people are reading charts and stuff, which back in the day might have been the case, but like it's mostly singing parts to each other to
right, da da da
like
da da da.
And it's like really good to hear that that's what happens on these great rock records that you grow up on or whatever. So yeah, it's just like, it really is just like mind blowing. I think we all in the possibilities, I think Chris found this and burned it, and we all watched it, and it's just over the years, it's just every once in a while, every few years, you pull it up and watch it. Now with YouTube, it's like, oh my god, it's, yeah, you learn so much from it, while also oh, these are certainly humans, there's
Yes.
there's a lot of flaws going on here. And Nick, that's right before he married Carlene Carter, I think, too. And and he made early 80s albums, had great songs on it, but I think from what I understand, he was kind of lost and stuff. And after Cruel to Be Kind, it was like the big hit that kind of, but then how do you follow that up, which that was a pretty big hit, right? I remember seeing it on TV and stuff, but it
Yes.
wasn't like, I'm sure he was like, they were probably pushing him after that to like even bigger kind of thing. And he kind of, whether it was a choice or whether it was just situationally, sort of pulled back some, I feel like in the early to mid 80s. And as the Dave Edmunds, although he kind of I feel like he kind of went on and embraced stuff with Jeff Lynne, like the sort of synthy stuff, and his stuff really kind of worked with that.
So now they head into day 3, and it feels like you're not outdoors with them. You're in a studio, and it really does get the sense of what it's like to spend all your days in a windowless space with some track lighting and just that kind of stale air. There is a definite feeling when you're recording that can kind of tire you out, I think. It can get in your head. It makes me sleepy sometimes, just
Absolutely.
sitting, waiting for people to get the thing done, and like listening and having to just be so focused on, was that good? You check out, and then you're like, oh shit, I need to pay attention to, somebody's singing right now, and they're asking me, what I thought. I don't know. Yeah, it was good. And then you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
They did a song called Sweet Little Liza, because this was a song by somebody else that was on a demo that they grabbed.
Yeah, I guess so.
And they were like, yeah, it's just some teenagers, I believe. And they were like, let's record this song. Let's do a cover of it. But they say something in it that I wanted to ask you about. They say, the hardest thing to do is to write a 3-chord song. Is that true?
I mean, I think, it's the hardest thing to do is write a good 3-chord song. I think you can do it. Yeah. I do think that's the case, in the sense that you're not relying on like any sort of like weird chord or something to change the mood. I mean, if you're gonna sustain it, it's got to be really good.
Right.
I could see that. I mean, I think that a 3-chord sort of rock and roll, traditional rock and roll, almost blues progression kind of thing it's been done so mmany times that it's like, and it's easy to fall into the cliche sort of like Chuck Berry thing, which is amazing. He's obviously, I'm not, he was the guy who did it maybe the best out of everyone. Like,
Absolutely.
and he even says something about play it like Chuck and something with a guitar solo, but like it's really hard to do it convincingly and make it fresh, in the 1978, and so, you could tell they were kind of like, at the same time, sort of, that was where I think Nick was talking about, how silly the lyrics are. Isn't that one where he's reading the lyrics and he's
Yeah.
just like, that's where the world's not going to stop turning if we, with no one hears this or whatever. But but ironically, it becomes almost the best performance in a weird way. It's not necessarily the best song, but it is like when
Right.
you could tell they get excited, and it's almost like because that's like the music. It's like very similar to probably what they grew up on.
Yes. Something's flipped in it. Like
Yeah, that's where and
they
that
just all of a sudden are like, oh, I think the pressure's off because it's neither of them wrote it.
right,
It's in a
right,
genre that they're like, I can devour this and do this all day long. Like we can slot in without anyone worrying about like, oh, this is what I heard in my head. I mean, that's one of the glorious things about doing cover versions is there
sure,
is a freedom of being like, we can go a different direction with this, or we can stay as close to it as possible. And that's kind of what the fun of the cover thing. And you can see that
absolutely,
in this. They, after, them writing each other about like, oh, you're not singing it right, or you're not capturing the emotion, or I want the solo to be different. They're being precious in a way that I don't think they
yeah,
really want to be, but they can't help it because they are such good
right,
songwriters that they're like, this is a really good song. It needs to be as great as possible. And it seems like in this
absolutely,
performance, they're just like playing
having
around and
fun.
just kind of
Yeah,
just throwing things at it.
absolutely. I mean, that's what looking at my chicken scratch here, and one of the few things I could read is it's well, first it says Graham Parker because I think he's in the background, right? Like in this
There
one.
starts showing up some pub rock luminaries.
Yeah, but he's there initially for this one without the other guys, and I didn't realize that. And he's just laughing, and they're having fun, and then underneath it says the fun part of recording, which is exactly what you're saying. Like you could tell that like there are moments, and even though they're probably a 50th of the whole time you're in the studio, it's like those are the moments that you're like this is amazing, and this is where things are moving, and you go to that higher gear, and I think it is a lot of it is the separation of songwriter from performer. You're able to just perform it and produce it and build it up without the pressure of like staying true to whatever you wrote, and
Right.
I think that's the downside of the singer songwriter shit that started with the Beatles, and whatever is that everyone writes the songs and performs it. Is like, yeah, you're splitting the energy down, and you're also, it's hard to separate that.
Am I dreaming? Was Huey Lewis hanging in the
Yes.
background too?
That's when I think so right after he does the vocal where they're like laughing because he's like doing his Elvis-y stuff, and they're all excited about it. And then when they start doing, I think it's when Albert Lee shows up.
Yeah, day 4.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. I don't want to
No,
jump
no, no.
ahead,
That's
man.
great. These two
Okay,
days blur together.
they do, and it's the same song, and that's the one where the minute Albert Lee shows up, and from what they're saying, he was living in L.A. and he's such a phenomenal guitar player who
Yes.
I just remember like reading about in guitar magazines before I even heard him or knew I heard him. Was reading about this guy and all these guitar for the practicing musician and all the embarrassing magazines I read in the 80s when I was a teenager to try to learn how to play guitar. But like he was the guy that was like knew how to do the rockabilly thing, and you could see it, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it's amazing. It's Huey Lewis, right, and then Phil Lynott, right, is back there, and then is that it? I mean, and then Graham Parker, I think, is still
Yeah.
there,
Yeah, yeah.
and then a guy who looks a lot like Adam Ant, but I don't think
Let's say it's
is
Adam
him.
Ant, though. Let's
Let's
say.
just say,
And then
you know
Adam
what? I mean,
Ant's
I'll look at
there.
it. What a
Lemmy
weird
from
thing.
Motorhead was
Let me
there.
show it up.
And one of the
Yeah,
residents was in the
yeah,
background in
absolutely.
the eyeball mask, and Lena Lovitch.
Yeah, it's like who'd have thought all those folks would be in the same thing. And then of course, as you nerd out about the pub rock thing, you realize, oh yeah, Huey Lewis played with the band that backed Elvis Costello up, and it all
Right.
kind of makes sense if you realize. And then there's even I want to say a Phil Lynott video that it's him and Huey Lewis maybe doing a song after Thin Lizzy. It's nice because it makes you realize like a lot of these musicians commingled a lot more than you'd think they would
Yeah, it's
just from here.
cool. And Dave Edmunds, he's fanning out that Albert Lee is in the
Oh
studio. He
God,
even says that he loves his playing so much because he doesn't borrow from anyone.
I've never heard anyone do that kind of B bending. Like he is taking it, he's taking the B bender guitar thing, which Clarence White started doing with the Byrds and stuff, and doing sort of a rockabilly, country kind of thing.
And the B bender, can you explain that?
Yeah, the B bender was like Gene Parsons, who played drums for the Byrds, and Clarence White, who was in the Byrds at the time and ended up playing the B bender. I think the two of them came up with the idea of having a thing where you push the guitar down and your guitar strap pulls on a lever that's connected to a spring that takes the B string, one of the higher strings on the guitar, and pulls it up a whole step. So it's like
It's amazing.
So you can hit a chord. You hit a chord, you push the guitar down, the neck down, and it bends it up like what a pedal steel guitar does naturally, and so there's a pedal steel sound going on, but it's different enough where it doesn't sound like a pedal steel, and I think you can use it in a very traditional way. But I think by that point, Albert Lee had definitely taken it a little bit in outer space, while staying in a traditional rock and roll context. I mean, that's the beauty of he's one of those guys like was a flawless guitar player. Like you hear what he does, and it could be a third and fourth take, but it looks like it's kind of the first take, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But he's so strangely wonky and weird with stuff that it was surprising how like precise it was, and it later realized it was a B bender. But yeah, it's an amazing thing, and I think the cool thing about this documentary is that you see it introduced with Dave Edmunds. They don't really talk about what's happening, but then you see him kind of working on it, and then you see Albert Lee do it, and it's like the same thing, but like lifted up a level. And it sort of introduces like a part of the reason why Dave Edmunds is just blown away by Albert Lee, his playing,
Yeah.
And then the humbleness of Albert Lee just kind of walking in like it sounded okay, What does Nick Lowe say? He says something like he's just like he's visibly like just like his mind is blown. He leans forward and after a long pause, and what he says like I see you've been reading my pamphlets, and it's like
it's
so like just
funny.
They're so funny. It's like all about this delivery and just watching their faces while he's doing it. Like Huey Lewis just looks like just his his eyes are just huge, and he's just freaking out, and then even Phil Lynott does like a thing where he like shakes his hand, like he's like snaps his fingers. He's like, that was the shit, and it's just like all these great musicians kind of blown away by this guy.
Yeah,
and you realize
they're fanning out, they're geeking out.
Yeah,
and that is part of the fun in music when you get to collaborate or cast with someone who's a hero of yours. It is hard not to just be like, holy shit, that is incredible, because
Absolutely.
you've just devoured so much of what is their essence as auditorily, and then to just stand next to them or be in a recording studio with them is a trip. So I think they get that, they capture that really well.
It's excitement. It's hard to wrap your head around. I think that kind of thing where it's just someone that does something that you love really, really well, and the be fortunate to be around it, and just and it's one thing like seeing it live is amazing, but I can't. It's got to be crazy to be in a studio where that's happening. I don't think I've really been able to do that, where it's like with someone that you haven't really ever played with, and all of a sudden you're playing or watching this like amazing person do this while they're being recorded, which again is a heightened state. Not always when you do your best work,
Right.
But like Albert, it's like such a higher level, and you could tell it's like not even thinking, he just does it, and I think that's a lot of it. They're just like, we're just going here and we do this sort of fun rock and roll pub rock shit, and then this guy comes out and he's like a master of that style,
Right.
So after they record with Albert Lee and everyone's super excited, it gets a little more serious, and Dave says, talks about Nick, saying that Nick really helped him out at a tough part of his life, and how you could really rely on him, and how band members, a lot of times are your buddies, and can really help when you need it. And I think that sort of leads into the sort of final conversation of the documentary, where it's Nick and Dave kind of having a serious discussion,
It's amazing.
kind of going back to the beginning. Of where the first conversation where Nick is sort of moping and complaining about stuff, but it sort of like gets a lot deeper at this point.
Yeah, I agreed. It's very heartfelt and very strange. It's like honest and stilted at the same time. It's that same language we're talking about, where they're very performative.
Right.
They're going to say things that maybe they don't really necessarily believe, but there's truth in it. And
absolutely.
So what I want to do is to round out the end of the documentary verbatim. I have broken down their dialogue into a one-act play that I would like to perform with you right now. And we're going to do our damnedest to put on a good show for everyone. So we present to you Born Fighters, a one-act play by Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds. In the darkness, we hear Albert Lee playing a lead over a Dave Edmunds track. The lights come up as the song fades away. Two musicians face each other. They are Nick, a bass player, and Dave, slightly older, a guitar player. There are several empty bottles of Blue Nun into their night. Nick lights a cigarette slowly, while Dave hangs onto his guitar, leaning back in his chair.
I want to get out there before I start sliding downhill. So therefore, I'm looking for something else, and I could think of a lot of things different to do. I'd go and work with my dad. I would be as happy as a sandboy as long as I could earn some buns. That's all I'm doing. And I'd rather play in the evenings. I'd be happy as a sandboy strumming with him in the evenings till it runs out of fun. As soon as it stops being fun, I'm off.
What a terrible attitude of despair. God.
No.
You're having the time of your life. You love it. You love music and all the songs you write. You think they're great. You know the ones you write are great. And you know the ones that are a bit meh, then you give them to me.
That's true. It's all right. But I don't think it's despair.
I think it is a very gloomy thing you were just saying.
But my whole life is ruled by gloom. Songs I do are inspired by gloom because I think most people are gloomy. What the fuck have they got to look forward to? I'm talking about Joe Blow delivers the milk.
You've got nothing in common with Joe Blow.
Maybe I haven't, but I should have. I should have something in common.
Maybe you should, but you haven't.
I just write things like da 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 da, like the music for Coronation Street or whatever. I just write or supposedly write the theme music for life. That's what I set myself up to do. I mean, the Bee Gees actually write theme music for life, so that's what the milkman is whistling.
Right.
You're just trying to make me feel better, but I'm not despairing at all.
I don't give a shit how you care, mate. I'm just telling you I heard all this crap you came out with, and I'm reacting to it. I think it's stupid. Really stupid.
Well, that's why I think you and me are friends. In 1978, more than any time, you have got to fly close to the wind. You've got to drive yourself heavy. And I do that because I don't do it because of anything. I do it because I like to, actually.
But really, on your days off, Nick, you've got to, and mine, you've got to bore yourself to death. Just do nothing.
No, I'm not going to blow it.
You're going to be dead.
I will snuff it. I will snuff it.
He doesn't know when to turn off the power.
I do know.
He doesn't have a clue. That's the thing about this band. Everyone in the band is completely different. And if I can't do something, then there's somebody else who can.
Yeah, but it ain't that important.
I got a few years up on you. I'm like 35 years old now, and he's 29, and he's a good bloke, actually. Interviewer from off stage. You think you're in better shape? Oh, yeah, actually, because I can switch it off. I come back here to this place on which you've intruded on. But generally, I just turn that switch off. This guy doesn't. If we're not recording tomorrow night, he'll be out boogieing like John Travolta, like, hey.
I wouldn't be seen dead.
No.
Boogieing.
Well, modern technology.
No, get out of here. My old man used to bomb Jerry's. That's what he did for 5 years. And every night he got back, they were shooting him down as hard as they could, but he somehow got through. And he's a fantastic guy, my old man.
I think he had a few days off, and you're going to allow yourself a few days off, but you're not going to, right? Put on the long shoulder, mate. Honest, really.
Bullshit.
Enough. You're going to have to.
It ain't that.
It is. Curtain falls, and that is the end of the documentary Born Fighters, with starring Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds. Amazing job. You did. You really started leaning in. I loved it. I really started. I think you found it.
I was really hitting the box line about halfway through just to get into character, and I think it worked. And not really a British accent. I'm not really sure.
No, I think mine was like New Zealand. Yeah. I don't know what mine was. It was like Cockney, New Zealand, with a little Iceland thrown in. Yeah, my apologies. But that was super fun.
No, I think the point was there, right? I mean, I think it was understandable, and you can see they go watch it for themselves, as they should,
And I think that, this we'll be performing this at the next Riot Fest in Chicago or something like that.
Right.
But It is, there's a lot being said there. It bookends the film. The two of them together, drinking, pushing each other, but with love, and calling each other out on stuff.
Yeah.
When I would play in the store, I remember people would just kind of stop in their tracks and watch this. If they had no context, there it was like, it's really might as well be a Mike Lee film or something at this point.
Right?
It's like a British kitchen sink drama.
Absolutely, and that's not something you see as far as music documentaries or any documentaries, mainstream, especially over here or whatever these days. Everything is sort of. It's almost like behind the music, there's music swelling behind them. This is like so classic British. I remember watching like the arena documentaries on different bands and stuff, and it's all just so dry and so nothing going on except the dialogue, which is British movies in general. Like back from that era, it's like it's just it's like a play, and this is like it's edited like crazy, but it is like this amazing play, and really kind of structured like it. I didn't think about it till we just did it, but like how it starts off at the beginning. Now I'm totally talking out my ass, but like just like the beginning with their conversation and going here and then climaxing with the the Albert Lee and the joy of that, and then ending it at where all the truths of their relationship and family and all this stuff revealed. It's like an hour long. It's pretty amazing.
Well, yeah, and they also he gets to be a sand boy.
That's right.
But I love that it ends with, "It ain't that," and then Dave says, "It is." It's like that is so like you can't what is this? This is total theater. Oh, it's amazing.
Obviously, I'm sure Dave Evans would never watch this, and I'm sure Nick. It would make their skin crawl watching that. It's like naked baby or something. But could you imagine them sitting together? I would love to see footage of them sitting there watching it.
Oh my God.
I mean, I guess they don't even really talk at this point, but it's but
I didn't know that. They don't talk.
Last I read somewhere that they're kind of not, not really talking, but I mean, hopefully they will, because I know Dave he's getting up there.
Yeah,
and, I mean,
totally.
They're both up there, but if you guys are listening, please, make them.
I think this play will bring them together that we just did.
I think so.
I think that someone will
the whole world,
or we'll get a cease and desist. One of those two things. Yeah. But now we're gonna get to the hardest question, because at the end of every episode, I always ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on what we've watched. And on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many empty bottles of Blue Nun Wine do you give this film?
I mean 10. And I mean, how can you have
that's
less? I mean,
totally right.
It's right. I mean, there's nothing in this film that I would change. Possibly because it's not like a hour and a half, 2 hours where there's always filler, but it's just everything about it is everything I love about rock and roll,
Amazing.
And now I'm gonna go buy some Blue Nun. Can you still buy Blue Nun? Do you know?
Siri, can you still buy Blue Nun? Oh, I don't have that. Okay.
I'm the one. I'll probably be going to the liquor store at some point at least in the next week. So I'll report.
If you can get Blue Nun, I'll put it in the show notes of this, and people will be able to order it online and get it shipped.
Maybe you could have a video of me drinking it and spitting it out and throwing up everywhere.
Exactly.
From what I've heard, all accounts, it's pretty horrific. But,
well, I'm glad we didn't get method with our play and actually, had to go full on. But Jay, it was so good to see you. Thank you so much for this. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate you asking. It was so much fun.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!